Hello and welcome to the Full Scottish here on Broadcasting Scotland. My name's Kenny McBride and I'm joined this morning by two excellent guests. Firstly by Andrew Wilson from the All Under One Banner organisation. Andrew, how are you this morning?
I'm well this morning, Kenny. How are you doing?
I'm not bad at all. And on the other side of me, we have playwright Peter Arnott. Peter, how are you doing?
Not so bad, thanks very much, Kenny.
Excellent. Well, we start today, as we always do, with our coronavirus statistics update. And as of yesterday afternoon, a total of 275,751 people in Scotland have been tested. Of those, 257,464 tests were confirmed negative, and 18,287 tests were positive. There were 429 people in hospital last night, 5 of whom were in intensive care, with another 14 in intensive care with suspected COVID-19. So at the moment, we have a total of 2,488 patients who have tested positive and then died from the infection. There were no new deaths reported yesterday, which is certainly good news because that applies really to Friday. So it's not actually got that kind of disguise that we sometimes see at the weekends where numbers are lower and then we get a wee jump on Monday when they get registered on the Monday. But that does look like, again, very good news. Another day with 0 deaths. So I'll just ask very quickly, Andrew, how do you feel we're doing as far as managing this pandemic at this stage?
I think from a Scottish perspective, it's maybe a case of steady as we go. I think we've seen a commitment to transparency and honesty and directness from the Scottish Government. We've seen some pretty plain talking from the First Minister, speaking directly to the people in Scotland. And I think the people of Scotland broadly have listened. Obviously, with the restrictions beginning to relax, there's more opportunity for confusion, and the complexity that the relaxation brings, we will take some time to get used to. But I think as we can see from the numbers that are being reported, and of course the Scottish Government's transparency with regard to and regularity with regard to the reporting of the numbers has also been important in building trust. I think we can see from those numbers that the situation appears to be, if not, appears to be improving, but we're not out of the woods yet.
Mm-hmm. And Peter, how are you feeling about the state of play with the pandemic as we speak?
Well, I suppose that there's a couple of things I suppose come to mind. First of all is of course that for all of that there's now a divergence between UK policy and Scottish policy, in that the Scottish policy seems to be towards getting as near to zero and as near to eliminating the virus altogether as we can get. Whereas the UK seems to think, rather like in Northern Ireland, they used to have acceptable levels of violence. I don't know if you remember, they used to use that phrase, but acceptable levels of death. And it does seem that the two levels are having both started fairly catastrophically together, but in a panic, really, of not really knowing what they were doing. And I think this is true both sides of the border. I do think that now, as we are coming through this, there's beginning to be a divergence, and it's partly a divergence of purely of personality, because I think as a performer, a sometime performer, and working in the theatre, the fact that Nicola Sturgeon does these news conferences every single day, I think is absolutely extraordinary, and as she's grown more assured in her performance all the time, it seems to me, and that. This is, I think, a major reason why the public attitude in Scotland seems to be different. It seems to be more supportive of what the government are trying to do, because people are looking at somebody who is obviously trying to deal with something and not somebody who is pretending to have beaten it every time they go on TV. Because this is the impression you get from Matt Hancock and Boris Johnson, is that because they both seem to subscribe to a macho winner-takes-all vision of the universe, they go on TV and declare victory all the time, and nobody believes them. Of course, they don't believe them. It's not. It's patently not true. So therefore, I think that's why, whatever else, whether you're an SNP supporter or not, Nicola Sturgeon has performed extremely well under very difficult circumstances, and that does engender a degree of confidence.
Yeah, well,
might see what happens next.
That degree of confidence does appear to be at least partially reflected in a poll published today in the Sunday Times showing support for independence at a record high of 54%. This is the highest it's been in a panel-based poll. Also shows overwhelming support for the SNP in the election for the Scottish Parliament, and an extraordinary degree of personal confidence in Nicola Sturgeon's handling of the coronavirus pandemic. This clearly sets a new sort of background level of tension over the border and over devolved issues and all of the tensions that have always existed in Anglo-Scottish politics. Now we do have a number of things happening along with that. We have obviously seen down south parts of the economy starting to open up when parts of the economy in Scotland are still closed down. For example, we saw last night the pubs were open. We're seeing more and more shops opening down south, more and more other aspects of business getting back to normal. And I wonder, Andrew, if I could come to you first of all, do you have any sense that the Professor Debbie Sreedhar has predicted that England is likely to go through a cycle of opening up and then locking down because it hasn't made the effort to get to zero or near zero cases before this economic reopening? Do you think that that's likely to have a long-term effect on the way the pandemic is managed in Scotland?
I think, well, I suspect insofar as I was listening to Professor Jason Leach yesterday, and it's been a clear message from him and others that international cooperation and international listening and learning has been an important facet or aspect of the response by the Scottish Government. And so, in a sense, I think yes, the approach that we take in Scotland will be informed by what happens in south of the border. However, I think that those learnings are likely to be from the negative impacts of the policy which now appears to be in place for much of England. I think it's telling that there's some press this morning talking about the way in which Trump is about to change his messaging. And the suggestion is that his messaging going forward will be learn to live with it, which resonates completely with what Peter was saying with regard to a, quote, acceptable, unquote, level of deaths. And so I think we will continue to see a divergence. The Scottish economy is opening up very gently. I will admit to having sat in a queue for a fast food outlet yesterday for far too long. It meant I could listen to Jason Leach on the radio. So we are seeing a very gradual approach, and I think that is the right thing to do. I think the one thing that crossed my mind is that in the daily updates we also receive for Scotland an estimate of the number of infectious people who are in our community. Mm-hmm. And I think that now it's an estimate. It's a statistical piece of work. It's not an actual number. But that messaging and that level of detail, I think, helps to inform people to make choices. And I think the number that I heard was 1,500 people in Scotland who are considered to be infectious at the moment in our community. And as that number comes down or rises, I think it makes it easier for the government to configure or reconfigure the response, and I think it also helps people make an informed decision as to what the priorities are at any given time, depending on what that number is.
Mm-hmm. Now, Peter, we've heard from Boris Johnson this £5 billion that he announced. Very quickly, the Scottish Government spotted that this was not, at least predominantly, not new money. This was money that was just being shuffled around from one account to the other, meaning that Scotland is going to have very, very little, if any, new money to spend on restarting the economy. How concerned are you about that, and what leverage do you think the Scottish Government has to press for more?
Well, I unfortunately think that we are currently in the situation of running a health emergency by focus groups of likely Tory voters. and very few of those likely Tory voters are Scottish. So I think that they're going to struggle. I mean, if the UK government can make announcements about travel corridors to safe countries, and just again, the two aspects of the shambles of that that strike you. One of which is the fact that they do announce 4 different totals of how many countries inside of 3 days, as far as I can make out. Which says, well, what are their criteria then? If they have some idea of what the figures are, for example, like the figures that Andrew was just talking about, the figures of numbers of people infected in the community, even if they're good estimates, then if the number is lower than you, then you're a danger to them, and if the number is higher, then they're a danger to you. So, I mean, having accepted a certain level of risk in terms of international travel, which perhaps is necessary, I don't know. The fact that there's no new money being committed in this particular way does, and therefore that no Barnett consequentials are going to be immediately applicable within the Scottish budget. It is concerning, but I think it's far too chaotic to be deliberate. Therefore, I think we are dealing with 2 different problems. One of which is that we have a rampantly inconsistent approach to everything going on within England, and secondly we have which has consequences for us, and secondly we have the relationships between the 2 governments, which do seem to be difficult. I think I was searching for a word there, but I think difficult is possibly the most neutral one I can come up with. So I think there are 2 levels of problem, and in a sense, you can probably the second of the 2 is probably easier to deal with, in that you can you can probably find sane civil servants still in Whitehall. Dominic Cummings can't have fired them all yet, I imagine that conversation is probably easier between St Andrew's House and Whitehall in terms of but in terms of actually trying to follow what UK government policy is, I think they don't know. So how the hell should we know what their policy is if they don't?
Yeah. Now, I will just remind you, I should have said at the top of the show, but forgot. But you'll have seen there some text, some tweets rather, flashing up on the screen. If you want to join the conversation, you can do. Follow us at Broadcast Scot and then use the hashtag #FoolScottish. We will keep flashing those up on the screen as we go on. But speaking of the state of the economy post pandemic, we have seen some discussion just very recently about this idea of the UK internal market. This is something that since Brexit and even before then, we have seen a lot of arguments from the unionists about this. But this new rule seems to imply what they're calling a mutual recognition regime. Which they've said it could require regulatory standards in one part of the UK to be automatically accepted in others. Now, I think it doesn't take a genius to guess that the one part that can make the decisions is Westminster. This is not going to be a case of the Northern Irish Assembly imposing standards on Wales. This is very much just the UK government saying we're in charge. Now, Michael Russell has written to the UK government about this with some extreme concerns. Andrew, what do you think the point of this legislation is, first of all, and secondly, what do you think the reaction will be from Michael Gove when he gets this letter from Mike Russell?
Well, I think my impression. I read Mike Russell's letter this morning. Excuse me. I think the reaction from Westminster will be the standard response to all communications from the Scottish Government, which is to ignore them. We have seen that since before Brexit, but certainly the point-blank refusal to hold the Joint Ministerial Committee regularly. And in terms of not even thinking about Scotland, but in terms of the news yesterday that I think the Welsh First Minister hasn't had a conversation with the Prime Minister since the end of May. So the traditional disregard that Westminster holds their possessions in, I think, will continue, and that will inform their approach. I can also see that I think this approach that's being suggested is consistent with a very Brexity taking back of control, in quotes, and so that kind of approach doesn't come as a huge surprise from this administration in Westminster. I do, however, think that there is a reasonable prospect that it turns out to be another almighty own goal by Westminster. The notion that, as I understand it, an unelected body appointed by the Prime Minister can then determine the way in which the SNHS operates, or food standards in Scotland, or all the manner of things that are devolved. The notion that the will of the Scottish people, as expressed by their elected representatives, can, at the stroke of a pen by an unelected quango in London, change or overturn the wishes of the Scottish people. I think that it's going to be a huge opportunity for lawyers and a huge opportunity for politicians in Scotland. But at the moment, it strikes me as a quite remarkable suggestion.
Mm-hmm. Peter, when we look at this this poll that we discussed at the start of the show, it does seem that part of what's happened is that the people of Scotland have got a wee bit sick of misgovernment from down south and have been more impressed with what they're getting from the First Minister and from the Scottish government. Do you think the UK government has any kind of thinking about that when it does things that clearly kind of tread on devolved competencies and, seem almost designed to get people's backs up in the devolved nations?
Well, I think one thing you have to bear in mind that is new, that is different about the Boris Johnson / Cummings administration, even from previous, even from the previous way in which Scotland and Wales, Northern Ireland could be ignored by Theresa May's government, is that the difference is that Cummings is deeply, deeply mistrustful of the entire apparatus of the British state, let alone the devolved Scottish state, and this is why, for example, they have they've farmed out the management of the coronavirus, the supply of PPE, for example, entirely to private companies, out with the control of the NHS. This is why the test and trace program in England again has been farmed out completely. Whereas in Scotland it's being run through local health boards, in England it's not. So in some ways, there's I can't remember who coined it, but that England is the first colony of Britain. Is that the colonial administration does actually apply to England as well? I think, and I think we should. I mean, whenever I hear someone in the Scottish national movement complain about London, I think, well, no, Hackney is as much a colony as Cumbernauld is actually in terms of the way it's run. But that aside, I think that there is, in a sense, we have a cultural and political advantage in Scotland in that we can and do, because of the devolved parliament, have another vision of how things could be. And so I think that the polling that you referred to earlier on is reflective of of what devolution was always supposed to be. That there's an alternative, there's a different way of doing things. So there's a different philosophy, and it may be. And again, it's not making a value judgment between one and the other, but even more than before, they're absolutely distinct. It seems to me. And so I don't see any way of imposing Brexit, for example, by a deeply, deeply centralizing, secretive, offshore government like this pack of Moscow creatures. I absolutely don't see any way in which they can make Brexit, quote unquote, work without being dictatorial. I don't see how they can do it. I mean, if they talk about imposing a single standard, as Andrew said, for example, the Scottish National Health Service and when they're buying drugs or when they're buying equipment, and they say, well, no, somebody in Whitehall will decide how this is done. This is, in a way, it's bizarre. It's bizarre that a Tory government, who 20, 30 years ago were absolutely, let alone when the NHS was founded, were absolutely horrified by the idea of Whitehall mandarins running absolutely everything about the economy of Durham, let alone the economy of Wick. That they have seem to be completely comfortable with the idea that Michael Gove knows, because he's got a job somewhere else, must know more and must be right, and so we have a situation where the imposition of Brexit does mean that devolved government simply can't work. I mean, you either have devolved government, which is a degree of cooperation and the mutual recognition they talk about. But when they talk about mutual recognition and in the same breath say what we decide goes everywhere, no matter what the circumstances, no matter what you want, no matter what your values are, it does seem that there's a fundamental contradiction which is not resolvable. I did say once a while ago that you can either have Brexit or you can have devolution, but you really can't have both. And so Brexit is a deeply centralizing impulse, which I think has got more to do with it than loathing of foreigners. I think it's that centralizing impulse, which in some ways is being exemplified by this government. I think that impulse makes the devolution settlement null and void. And I think that what's happening in Scotland electorally is that people are electing governments with whom a Tory government in Westminster simply cannot function. And this is a choice that is being made. And it's a choice is being made which is going to lead to confrontation one way or the other. It just has to. You can't, either we knuckle under to every term that Michael Gove or his successors decide to impose, or we resist them. That's it. We're being pushed into a binary situation, just like we were pushed into a binary situation with a referendum. And in that case, we weren't ready for it, perhaps. But maybe now this time we are.
Well,
Kenny, I think Peter's point's absolutely spot on. And also it brings to my mind quite a famous cartoon from the Cameron administration and it drives home the point that especially the Westminster government at the moment, and no disrespect to writers, but it's a government of columnists. And I don't mean fifth columnists, I mean people paid to write opinion in the papers. And there's a famous cartoon from the Times of Michael Gove volunteering to David Cameron to fly a plane in order to defeat invading aliens, and Gove insisting that he was fully qualified to do so because he had written about it in the paper, and inevitably failed in that task. So we can maybe take a small crumb of comfort that in the context of an administration with Gove and Johnson at its centre, that they are so pre-programmed to be unable to deal with detail or to be on top of their briefs, and instead they deal in glib phrases and communicating in the way that they think is most appropriate for the moment for that specific moment in time and nothing else. So there is maybe hope that these plans may founder. But I would completely agree with Peter's point. He was prescient when he said it, and it's more true than it ever was before. Brexit and devolution are mutually exclusive.
Well, speaking of differing approaches north and south of the border, and perhaps decisions being made for a good headline rather than for good reasons, yesterday we saw pubs reopening across England. This was a big deal. This was Super Saturday, celebrating Independence Day, which, will not make a lot of sense if you think too deeply about it. But from a bunch of British nationalists. But there you go. Now, following this, we have seen pictures, particularly from Soho in London, of huge crowds of people packed very closely together. The chairman of the Police Federation, John Apter, has said it was crystal clear that revellers would not adhere to the 1 metre plus rule as restrictions were eased. And it does certainly seem from the state of how busy the streets were, how busy some pubs were, that there is going to be a further wave of infections coming out of this. Andrew, first of all, is it just the case that we shouldn't be encouraging people to drink during this pandemic? Because when you start drinking, your inhibitions are lowered, your sense of risk is lowered, so you start being a wee bit more touchy-feely with people and a wee bit less concerned about potentially transmitting a virus.
Kenny, I think I think those issues are, as the representative from the Police Federation of England has said, that those aspects of drinking are crystal clear. I think there is probably there are some significant societal aspects for us to think hard about, given the culture of drinking that we have, both at home and in pubs. And in some senses, the fundamental nature of alcohol and the consumption of alcohol with friends, the large part that plays in our society. And so I think the changes that the lockdown restrictions have brought to that have been significant. I think the period of time that we've been locked down clearly hasn't been long enough for our approach and our attachment to these rituals and these behaviours. Our attachment has not been reduced at all. If anything, absence has made the heart grow fonder for it. So I think there are significant challenges. Of course, I think beer gardens in Scotland are allowed to reopen from tomorrow. Now, putting to one side the meteorological challenges of drinking in a garden in Scotland, especially in July, as we've seen with the weather this past week, the ability to make the significant changes that will be required to reduce the risk of people consuming alcohol in pubs together, indoor in pubs together, to reduce that risk to an acceptable level, is going to be really, really hard on the publicans, on the licensees, and on everybody. So I think a very gradual approach back to that sort of behaviour, and a very carefully thought out and plainly explained set of guidelines and regulations that are required, are going to be important. And I think that's consistent with the way in which the Scottish Government have gone about their response, certainly in the last few months. And so I think we're going to see more of the same in an attempt to manage the risks as they come forward.
Mm-hmm. And Peter, speaking of this idea of kind of chasing headlines rather than sound outcomes, do you think there was an element of that in the idea of making it a Saturday, having it being the 4th of July, and talking about our independence and freedom and all these kind of things, talking about Super Saturday, rather than, say, opening the pubs on a Monday when most people are, or more people are at work, more people have a reason to get up in the morning, and perhaps might have eased into going back to the pub a wee bit more than happened yesterday? Do you think that makes a big difference?
Well, I think Andrew's point earlier on about the about we have a government made entirely of people who used to work for newspapers, is that they do seem to think that way. That they do seem to think that if you can make a splash and have a nice bit of alliteration going on, a Super Saturday. I see it's also being called Super Spreader Saturday on some hashtags I've seen on Twitter, but they do seem to be to want to work that way. I mean, it is very odd, but one of the things is this: there is this impulse to get back to normal, and to get back to what life used to be like, and I just don't know whether such a thing is possible. Whether you can have a kind of socially distanced pub experience that is conscious of something like the coronavirus, and takes care. You can say things I think become much more utilitarian. I mean, the idea of going for a haircut now, and I mean, I'm someone who's losing hair rapidly, and I could do the haircut, but the idea of it doesn't fill me with pleasure. I mean, it never did particularly. But again, the idea of going to a pub and having to follow lots of rules doesn't seem to be consistent with in a sense with the rituals that I'm used to. So therefore, I don't feel any particular kind of wish to. So therefore, I think there is a different kind of motivation going on. I think it's going to be interesting in future times to see what people want out of this experience. I mean, they went to demonstrations for Black Lives Matter, and they were just as tightly packed. So, in a sense, I mean, those scenes from Soho and out in the outdoors didn't scare me half as much as what I thought. Well, what's the inside of those wee places in Soho going to be like? Because they're small and cramped the best of times. But I do think the idea of opening pubs gradually on a Monday. It's a hostage to fortune. Who knows what's going to happen? Well, as we open things up, again, there's another cliche of our times that locking things down, although it causes enormous difficulties and challenges, is comparatively simple compared to opening things back up. Because when you're opening things back up, you have to, in a sense, decide what you want out of them, and I suppose that's what I'm getting at. Is what do you want out of going to the pub? And yes, the taste of a nice cool lager does appeal to me, but I can buy some and put some in the fridge. I could do that. Mm-hmm. But what exactly are you looking for from that experience? And I guess I'm an old man, and friendships mean less than they used to. I suppose when I was 25, it was different. And but brings in the whole generational thing that you have younger people who aren't personally necessarily going to be affected by the virus versus old buggers like me who are,
Yeah. Kenny, I'm also reminded, I think there's a meme going around, it may or may not be true, but a quote from Samuel Pepys pointing out that the pox in exchange for a dram isn't a very good bargain. And
I think it's a fake quote. It's one of those fake quotes that's really quite good.
No, okay. Well, thus speaks the writer, of course. And Peter, I wanted to come to you on this as well, because when we talk about opening things up, theatres are one of the sectors that it seems like it's going to be one of the last sectors of the economy to open back up. Clearly, there are problems with social distancing within theatres. Yes. And then, obviously, it becomes uneconomical for theatres to run if they're only able to have 25% capacity. How are you and people that you know in the theatre business coping at the moment, and how big of a threat is this to the industry as a whole?
To answer the first question first, it's very much a mixed picture, just as it was beforehand. So for someone like me, I'm a playwright. Therefore, my working life is scheduled about a year and a half ahead of what's going on. So therefore, I'm writing a play at the moment. I'm doing an adaptation as it happens, which is good because original creativity is quite beyond me. But the idea of adapting a novel for the stage. But I do have the uneasy feeling in the back of my head that I'm adapting it for a stage I can't quite imagine. I can't quite, I can't see it the way I usually can. I can't make the same assumptions that I could beforehand. But for people who are not as lucky as I am, and for people who are not lucky enough to make 50% plus of their earnings from self-employment, and therefore that government scheme applies to me. A lot of people working in the theatre work casually. They don't hit that 50%. They have lot, and they are seeing their whole lives disappear like smoke. I mean, there are people I know who are already in very serious financial difficulty, and because they're not conventionally employed, or conventionally self-employed. They fall between stools. and it's very difficult. And the benefit system has never been good at coping with the creative lifestyle, shall we say. And the tax system and bank managers find it equally incomprehensible that you can earn absolutely nothing and then suddenly 6,000 quid. And it's a very odd way to live. And the virus is, in a sense, accentuating everything that was odd and difficult and mixed about it. We have. Again, a difference between here and the UK is that there doesn't seem to be any fixed policy in the UK for even attempting to deal with the enormous complexities of the economics of producing theatre that is locked down. But whereas in Scotland there has, at least on Friday, just there was a very welcome. There was £10 million, now not an inconsiderable amount of money in governmental terms, not a lot, but still and that amount of money was put into the major theatre buildings and establishments as an emergency payment, as basically this will get us through and avoid people being permanently laid off and theatre companies being closed, because it's very difficult to reopen them if they're completely closed. Until March. It's very specifically till March. I don't know any of the details. I suspect the March date is because that's the end of the financial year. I suspect, and so therefore, but they know they're going to have to think again. But again, the Scottish government are in the position of they can't borrow money in the same way the UK government can, even though it's maddeningly cheap to do so for governments at this moment in time. And so, therefore, they are entirely dependent on something happening in terms of British money investment for the theatre, and for that to be new money, for them to be able to release a Barnett Consequential increase in Scottish theatre funding, because it's been very, very difficult for a number of years, and in a way. I do work in a business which does feel like it painfully raises itself to its feet and then it hits back down to its knees by something. But this has just knocked it flat. I mean, everything completely shut. Income. I mean, I lost a tour, and I lost the royalties income from a tour. But in a sense, I mean, my situation is as I said, is comparatively good, and whereas. You have some, and again, different theatres in different places have different financial profiles, but the dreadful irony of the whole thing, I think for me the worst irony is that we were told 10 years ago that we were going to, when this government came to power in Whitehall, that we were going to have to at least learn to think Tory. To talk Tory, more importantly, and therefore to speak in terms of the economic tax take, the amount of money we put into the economy, and all the rest of it. And to gradually wean ourselves off direct government funding, so that now almost all the money from the arts comes from either lottery funding or box office, and it's the companies like the Lyceum in Edinburgh, for example, or Pitlochry. Who are both rely on 80% plus for their income on box office, which is an extraordinary position, which theatres 20, 30 years ago could only have dreamed of. They're the ones who've been hit absolutely the hardest, because their income has dropped to absolutely zero. And that means they can't employ the people they normally employ. They can't employ, obviously, there's the actors, but there's also, I mean, if you see 10 people on the stage, that means there are 10 people behind it and 10 people in the administration, and another 5 doing the marketing. And it's much bigger than what you see. And plus the box office and front of house staff, who are another 10 or 15 people who are temporarily employed. And if even institutions like the Royal National Theatre in London have laid off all their staff, their front of house staff, because they simply have no idea what's going on. And now the situation is as I say, is marginally better in Scotland, in at least that the government has genuinely good intentions, but they've got an awful lot on their plate. You know, I mean, even if you look at Fiona Hislop, who's the minister responsible for the arts, she's also got at least 4 or 5 other things on her portfolio, and so it's. I mean, I don't know how they can how they can spare the time. So there is a way in which I feel the money that was injected on Friday, in some ways, is a fantastically welcome gesture of support. But it doesn't feel terribly directed, and nobody I know in theatre, I don't know everybody, knew anything about it immediately before it was going to happen. And in a way, that's somewhat unexpected. To be talking to someone I won't name them, but someone who runs a major venue in Scotland, and the day before this rescue package is announced, has no inkling it's about to happen, or at least they have a fantastic poker face, and I'm not sure that they do. So it's the situation is extremely challenging, but at least we feel that we have temporarily, at least until March or until thereabouts, it's bought us time. We have room to breathe. It's bought us time, but the important thing is to use that time properly for looking at what we can do in the meantime. What we can do in the meantime without an audience and without a conventional audience, and in unconventional spaces. How we can monetize some of that. We can't monetize very much of it. You can't monetize online, really. I mean, as Broadcasting Scotland well knows, it's extremely difficult to broadcast to get money for doing anything online. But it's and there have been initiatives. There have been people have held their hands up and said, "Look, I'm still alive. I'm not dead yet." And it's been very welcome. I've been one of them. I've written things, and I've written things for online performance. I've been blogging. I've been lobbying. There's all kinds of things that one can get up to, but none of them substitute for a plan. None of them substitute for, but a plan also requires a vision, and that in a sense is the real challenge of. And as I say, this is bringing back hopefully where the circle began. Is when you come out of lockdown, when you reinvent society, you have a chance, I think, to reinvent it along lines that are more effective, more efficient, more compassionate, more humane, moral than what you went into it with, and the chaos we have a. I mean, I won't bore everybody who's watching with going into the complications and contradictions of the way that the arts is financed and organised in Scotland, but believe me, it's not. It's very difficult to manoeuvre your way through, even when you've been doing it forever, like I have. Yeah. And there has to be. I mean, I can finish, I suppose, this diatribe with the old Irish joke, which is, how do I get to Glockamora? Says, well, I wouldn't start from here if I were you.
Yeah. Andrew, once you've heard that diatribe from Peter, how are you feeling when you look at the state of the arts scene, the cultural scene in Scotland? Do you have concerns, hopes, worries? What are you thinking when you look at all this?
Firstly, I completely understand, and I stand shoulder to shoulder with Peter's diatribe in every single respect. He speaks with great experience and great passion and great directness about this very serious point. In a previous life, I worked for Edinburgh International Festival, and it is still, and I live in the city, and so it is an important thing to me. My history and my existence and my being part of our community in this city, and that it will not take place this year in any recognisable shape it's painful. I'll put it in those terms. However, I think what we may see, and I'm seeing a few glimmers of suggestions of things changing. I'm aware that music performances being held in open spaces with people in their cars is starting to appear. I think there are gigs being organised in August. I've seen advertising for them. We've seen the television channels and the large broadcasters bring forward their plans to show screen productions of stage productions. Mm-hmm. So I'm thinking specifically of the filming of Hamilton, which I think is now on one of the TV channels. And so it struck me that at a time when, and this may seem an odd thing, at a time when football teams are about to return to contact training, that might make it easier for theatre companies, at least those who are working on the stage, to begin to work together, and that there may be means by which we can start innovating, or the industry can begin to innovate again and can start to think of ways in which these things can be done. And the challenges that Peter talks of, in particular the monetization of online events, I think we've seen some of the comedy production companies who started with work being done for free. As we lock down, they are starting to begin to try to monetize things. And I think at least an element of our society is now much more comfortable with online events than was previously the case. And so there is maybe some shifts and some changes there that may give some tiny hints of grassroots or possible directions. But I think the challenges for the industry and those who work in the industry in Scotland are huge. And the contrast between those countries in Europe, for example, who have made significant investments in their creative industries as part of the lockdown recovery financial packages, and the UK, where there has been next to none, I think is very striking and is also very worrying.
Well, Peter, before I come back to you, I will just point out that Broadcasting Scotland is ready and willing to help wherever we can. We have been working on a couple of ideas to try and support the drama world a wee bit. But I wonder, when we talk so much about monetization of work, Peter, how much do you think this kind of pause in the economy that we've seen over the last couple of months offers an opportunity for us to say that actually, making money, the increase in GDP that we get from the sector is not actually the important thing. The important thing is bringing art and culture and drama and music into people's lives.
I think I think you're right. I think that in a sense there are three arguments for the arts, if you like, which are not to do with truth and beauty, which obviously for somebody like myself, truth and beauty are fine. I mean that's a sufficient justification for any amount of activity. But for those who insist on there being something else, there is the economic argument in terms of the contribution of the sector to the general economic activity of the world, and Edinburgh knows all about that. When Edinburgh does complain every year, but by God, they can do with the money. And then there's the other side of that people talk about the subsidised arts as being a test bed for talent. I'm particularly uncomfortable with that one, actually, with the idea. I don't know that it may be that David Tennant's first gig was at the Tron in Glasgow, and it was, but it's in a sense the idea that the arts, the subsidised arts, have no worth except as a preparation for Netflix is I've always felt uncomfortable with that, and I think the third, a largely unspoken element is that what we can be is a refresher of the fabric of the whole of society, and that for example, Dundee Rep, for example, I think could become a much more general model for theatre making. I can only speak with any degree of authority and experience within theatre, and Dundee Reps, because they have a full-time ensemble of actors, and there's only 6 of them. It's not huge. Those actors are available and have been available throughout the pandemic for working with schools, for working with other socially isolated groups, for development of product, for all kinds of R&D work. And so there's been that sense of the only people with any permanent jobs within Scottish theatre are the people who are the administrators, and of course they have to have those jobs. But it does strike me as that we do have an opportunity for rethinking, first of all, why we value the arts. And I think that, in a sense, what we have to make, if there's going to be a new deal, which I think there has to be a new deal for the arts, for theatre, for the arts in general in Scotland, I think they have to be very explicitly say, well, that you've got taxpayers and increasingly and more importantly in the arts, lottery ticket buyers, most of whom may not go anywhere near the Lyceum or the Traverse or the Sitz or even His Majesty's in Aberdeen, but they nonetheless, if they feel that what they're helping to support, to offer the seed upfront money for, if you like, is something of lasting social, economic, cultural, political value in our society. I mean, there are those of us in Scottish theatre in particular, and the Scottish culture, who think that a good part of, for example, the case that has been made for greater Scottish self-government over the past 30 years, if it hadn't been for the artists, it would have been a lot more difficult to make that case. That a lot of the activity that people have been involved with, whether it's in music, literature, theatre, whatever it has been, that part of creating a new Scottish identity in the last 20, 30 years, that the arts have been absolutely central to that. And if the arts are central to that part of life, then they can also be central to a lot of other things. So that a lot of the best work that has been done, one of the best shows I was ever involved with was with a company made up entirely of refugees, whom we were the only people asking them, who didn't ask them where they came from, but we got them involved in making a show and making a show for an audience made up of their friends and supporters, and it was one of the best things I've ever been involved with, because of the enormous human richness of the process of creating that piece of work. So, and the thing is that we can enhance and enrich all kinds of aspects of life. I mean, for example, the Glasgow Citizens. It's not. I mean, they're known as a theatre company. They're known as theatrical producers who hire in their actors. They're probably less known for doing development workshops in Barlinnie, but they do, and for doing performances, and with material written by inmates of prisons and working with socially excluded groups of all kinds. And this is normal, standard, and largely unsung practice. But I think it could be absolutely across the board, and it could be and it should be much more upfront. So this is what we do. We are a part of the community. We are part of Scotland talking to itself about itself, but also exporting it to the world. And I think that we have a potentially enormous role to play as we have the opportunity of reinventing our society, at least to a degree, as we come out of this emergency. And I think that there are people I know who are just itching to take part in that, who are and can contribute in ways I can't imagine to how rich and exciting a place this could be to live.
Yeah.
And so, there we go.
Yeah, I will just say we talk a lot about universal basic income on this show, but last year Rivers Cuomo, the singer from Weezer, the band Weezer, said that if a universal basic income was introduced in America, America would produce a new Beatles every year, just because of the number of bands
it's possible.
Of bands that would be able to stick together and keep working when they didn't necessarily sell any records or any tickets. Andrew, I'll come to you very quickly for a quick comment on that idea.
I think it's absolutely right. I'm of a certain age, so I reflect upon the way in which there was an explosion in popular music in Scotland under Mrs. Thatcher, would you believe? Because as part of the attempts to seed small businesses, those who were involved in bands found they could set up small businesses, get an income from the government, and that allowed them to pursue their art. So everything from Simple Minds to the whole range of Scottish bands at that time who are still influential. I think the point about UBI producing a similar creative explosion is very important, and I completely agree with Peter's point that the role of the creative sector in our journey towards independence has been absolutely fundamental, and long may it continue.
Yeah, we do send out our very best wishes to all of those people. I mean, I know a number of people who work in the theatre as well, both backstage and on stage, and it's a very tough time for everybody, as you say, the casual labour is under a lot of pressure right now. So we do send out our best wishes to all of those people. But that is just about all we've got time for today. So thank you very much to Andrew Wilson and to Peter Arnott for joining us. And thank you too for joining us at home. We make these shows for you, and it wouldn't be worth doing if we didn't have an audience. We did talk a wee bit about monetizing work online, and this is the bit where I have to ask you, if you are able to support Broadcasting Scotland financially, then please do go to broadcastingscotland.scot/register. Sign up there as a supporter, and your £5 a month helps us just to, first of all, keep the lights on, but then to develop new shows. We have been talking a wee bit about producing some drama during lockdown. It's more challenging than we thought it might be, but we are still working on it, and we hope that we can show you something very soon. If you're not able to support us financially, though, again, we do understand. We've talked today again about people who are left without any income during lockdown. So if you're not able to support us financially, please don't feel bad about it. We do understand. The shows will always be free to view online, but you can still help us by following us on Twitter @BroadcastScot and by finding us on Facebook, either facebook.com/BroadcastScot or just search Broadcasting Scotland. Then share the shows around, be that marketing team for us, get the word out about what Broadcasting Scotland is, what we're doing here, and how we contribute to the life of Scotland. It's what we want to do is be the national broadcaster for Scotland. So do please help us out that way if you can. And as well, if you'd like to get involved here at Broadcasting Scotland, maybe you're not so busy at your normal work just now, then there would be a role for you here. Just let us know what it is you want to do, what skills you have, what skills you want to learn, and we will find a place for you. Broadcasting Scotland has lots of space for lots more people to get involved and really help us build the channel up. But that is all we have time for today. So once again, thank you to Andrew and to Peter. Gordon will be back tomorrow at 7 with the Scotland at 7. I'll be back on Tuesday at 7 with my regular slot. But until then, that is all we have time for. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you again soon. Have a great day.